Hey everyone, and welcome to the Rowdy Podcast. I'm your host, Rowdy. Today I am joined with Melony Butler. Now, she is the founder of the Eagles Healing Nest and somebody that is very near and dear to my heart. Melony, will you give just a quick introduction of what you do at the Eagles Healing Nest and how you got started into some of these things?
Sure, absolutely. So I am Melony Butler, and my journey actually started when I was 8 years old around a campfire of Vietnam vets. One of them being my stepfather, and I being the only girl, I might have been a tad spoiled. And so when it was bedtime, I always got to stay up. So I got to hear about Vietnam, what they did. I got to hear about coming home. I got to hear about the epic fails of the VA and the government. And I got my first dose of what a stand down looked like back in those days, because my stepfather would take me, and keep in mind this happened in LA, and Pismo Beach was where we camped, and it was very isolated at that time, but that's where they were comfortable.
Just for the viewers, listeners, can you explain what a stand down is?
Sure. A stand down was created after Vietnam, and essentially it was the government's way to hide homelessness among veterans. So they would pull up with a semi-load of gear and literally throw it out the doors and hope that they would go hide off the back streets and in remote areas.
Okay.
Now it's evolved a little bit more, but the government got their hands in it. So there's some very specific organizations that do stand downs now. I can tell you the best stand downs are created by veterans for veterans, not by anyone getting government funds.
Yeah. And for the funding for those types of things, what does that look like, and how hard is it to acquire funding from the government to do those things?
It's very difficult. So the stand down that I've been involved with since before the nest, actually my husband's first deployment, I went out to Great Falls, Montana, and they have a vet for vet stand down. Matter of fact, Mama Jill came with me last year and was a speaker, and it was created by Vietnam veterans. So their different providers come in. Well, the VA system wanted our information. So like what I did and specialized in when I went out before the nest was even started was I had a tent outside of the building, which is at the fairgrounds, and the veterans, and sadly, I actually called now retired Adjutant General Shellito screaming, and you know me, not politically correct, because there was actually veterans from Minnesota that were there at that stand down. And so the tent that I was in was for the veterans from way back when. A lot of our Vietnam vets, now we're seeing a lot of the first Desert Storm veterans that are off the grid entirely. And so it's a trust issue. So I had a tent that was set up that they specifically would come in there, that I would handle those cases, and we meet their needs at that moment. Meaning if they've come down from the mountains, they're probably in need of dental, maybe their eyeglasses broke, definitely cold weather gear. Well, you have to fill out all of these umpteen forms of paperwork to get the cold weather gear that essentially our government throws away like everything else. And but we do an intake with them. And so we had their information, and that was a trust building thing that we did with the veterans that come there. That information was never shared with government entities at all. And they wanted that. And
the government wanted that.
The government wanted it. And we kept saying no. If the veteran chose to use, and the VA was there and offered what they all do, because there are certain components of the VA that does work okay, but when you get to mid-level to upper level, it's nothing but corruption. And so they decided that they were going to determine who was in need, who was homelessness enough to be able to get cold weather gear.
Now that was the VA, or that was the government?
That was the VA.
Okay.
And who's part of the government that's there. That's, if people want to know what government health care would look like, ask a veteran who's been
Yeah.
waiting years and decades to have their needs met. So,
But in terms of government funding besides to the VA,
right.
is there any grants or things like that that you guys can use when you're doing the stand downs, or is that kind of just off the table?
Well, no, certain entities, certain groups can get that because they're willing to agree and do whatever they say to give them the numbers and statistics they need.
Okay.
We don't
So
do that.
you basically have to kind of forfeit information and those kind of things in order to even get.
Right. You have to forfeit the information. You have to follow all their rules. And a good example of that is there's this amazing little man, I call him, out in Montana. He's been at the stand down forever. He from Korea.
Okay.
And at the end of every month, he eats freaking cat food. And every year he just wanted to come to the stand down, and he would walk over, and he just wanted to be with veterans. And we would I gave him a quilt of valor one year. And then he always comes back for his military boots and warm socks. And he never takes more than he needs, but I always made sure that he got what he needed. Mm-hmm. And I would also go and without any red tape and make sure that I had gotten him, because I knew about what time of the month he ran out of funds to have normal food. And I would do microwavable meals and go purchase them. And with the organization in Texas, we got him a little freezer so that he never had to eat cat food again.
That's awesome.
And so he came to the stand down, and he had been very ill. And of course, he comes to find me, and he was giving me, as all veterans do, a hard time. And I got him over to our chow hall where he signs in and he visits, gets a little haircut, and it's very difficult for him to walk, you know, as far as he does to come. And so we would make sure he had everything that he needed. So I took my little happy butt over to where the excess things that the VA so graciously gives our homeless veterans, as long as they get control over it. And the Air Force Base in Great Falls, they send over their young recruits, and they help us put up these tents and help us man stations and then that type of thing. Anyway, so I walk in the room, and the the Vietnam vets are at the door. And I walk in and I said, I need socks. I need this size boot. And I started naming them. And the VA rep says, ma'am, did you get that approved? And I said, I don't need your approval. And she said, no, I need to approve anything coming out of here. And I said, go to hell. I said, I'm not telling this Korean vet that he can't have this. You should have maybe made sure that his needs were met and he wasn't eating cat food and going cold. And she's like, I'm going to get someone. And the Vietnam vets that know me that were at the door goes, get back, this is going to get real. And I said, feel free. We're going to step outside this door, and I got Fox News here. And I'm going to explain to them that this gear that you are going to throw away anyway, that you won't allow me to give it to a veteran. And so she stormed off, and I laughed, and the poor little recruits were like, who do we listen to? And the Vietnam vets were like, listen to her. So I got my gear, I took it over to him, and he cried and gave me a hug, and I got him a ride back home. She comes storming over. Well, two of the founders from the Vet for Vet stand down said, you just leave her alone. Problem with, was a 4-day stand down. They only show up for a day and a half of that.
And when they're there, what are they doing? I mean, so they have all this gear, but they want to keep control.
Well, they don't work that station. They work their table to say, look at us, we're the great.
Okay.
And we're here to help you. But here's all the red tape, and here's all this stuff. Well, for anyone that has truly any experience or truly cares about a veteran that may have been decades in the mountains or on the streets or battling addiction, and by the way, they help make them addicted. Mm-hmm. Yep. By giving them, the highest number we've had here is 35 medications for a veteran.
Yeah, and I think that's a go-to. So for people who don't know, I've been going to the VA for 6.5, 7 years now, and their goal is always to push meds, right? And to like the first option is, here is some sort of medication for your anxiety or for this or for that. If you have, back pain, we'll give you pain meds. And all that does is create an instance where a veteran can become addicted to those pain meds rather than actually solving the problem. And so now you've created another problem rather than actually solving the first problem.
Absolutely. And not only that, even with the physical injuries,
Mm-hmm.
why not fix the physical injuries instead of giving oxycodones for months and months and months at a time?
Correct. Yep. And
You know?
that's one of the issues that comes with the VA. So one of the things I want to get back to is kind of, and I know you and I have talked in the past about this regarding funding for the nest that came from the government or grants that you guys were trying to acquire and the rules that came with that, because I think that the stand down and then even other entities that you're trying to get grants from, there's always red tape. So can you kind of go in a little bit in depth of the examples that you've dealt with the Eagles Healing Nest so people understand? And by the way, so just so the viewers and listeners know, the Eagles Healing Nest is a place in Sauk Center, Minnesota, that veterans can go to and get help. And there's veterans that stay there. There's veterans that also go there, like myself, to just hang out with other vets and spend time with one another. The community has embraced the organization and the people that stay there to help, with jobs, all kinds of different things. So that's where this is coming from. But Melony had gone to the government to get grants to continue to help more and more veterans. And so I kind of want to get into that a little bit as to just what you've been told.
Yeah. So if we go back to that campfire, every one of those veterans around that campfire has now taken their life. Every one of them. And one of the things that we always talked about around that campfire was a place just like where we were sitting, vet to vet. And I promised them around that campfire that I would always take care of veterans. I had no idea where that would go. None. Zilch. I was 8 years old. What would I know? So every poppy contest, coloring contest, I did. I won. I did that. When kids were bringing home puppies and kitties, my mom would come home and there would be a homeless veteran and I'd be feeding them peanut butter and jelly because that was the only thing I knew how to cook.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, honey, you can't do that. Why? Because I don't have a fear. People should not fear veterans. They should not. Don't let the media or any of that BS cloud you. You should not fear them.
Mm-hmm.
You should not fear mental health. You don't fear someone that has a heart condition. You don't fear someone that has diabetes. And this is something that you should not fear. They will protect you long before they would ever harm you. That's the reality. So then you fast forward, and I'm a wife and a mom. My husband served in Iraq, Afghanistan. My oldest son was attached to a unit here in Minnesota and deployed to Iraq. As he was coming home, my next son deployed to Afghanistan, and we thought we were then good to go. And the commander called, and my husband went back to Afghanistan. But when my son came home, he was suicidal. And I got a call in the middle of the night, which took me back to my stepfather. And I called the VA. I called the VA in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And they said that A, he didn't qualify, and B, I couldn't take him there.
What were the qualifications that he was supposed to meet in order for them to even attempt to help him? I mean,
I am not sure. Now I know it's a game.
Mm-hmm.
It's statistical numbers. It's bullshit is what it is. And so I called his command, which at that time was Adjutant General Shellito. And because I had been doing family readiness, I helped create the Beyond the Yellow Ribbon with him. And his go-to person, if he wanted to know the truth, was me, because I didn't blow smoke up anyone's butt.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to know what was happening on the ground. Family readiness was important to him. Taking care of his troops was important to him. And he did that. He didn't do that by sending someone else. He did it himself. So I called him at home in the middle of the night, and there was a whole lot of 4-letter words coming out of my mouth. And in the meantime, my son's battle buddies and my husband, they were out searching as I kept him on the phone. And then I remembered that I had tracker on his phone. So that's ultimately how we found him.
Okay.
And he's begging me to die. He's begging me on my floor, and the VA is playing games. So the general called the VA, who then agreed to take him. And there was lots of empty beds there, but yet they said that they were full.
Mm.
You see, that's a whole game in itself. And so essentially they gave him medication and sent him out the door. And he came home and essentially was laying on the couch drooling from medication. You see, my son never took medication. He had 2 dreams, and that was to serve his country and to box on the U.S. Olympic team.
Okay.
And so I took him to our local provider, who was a Vietnam vet, who literally took him in a room after hours, took off his white coat, and they just talked while I waited in the room. Outside the room, I should say. And he came out and he said, don't give him that medication, give him what he needs, and that's veterans. And that Monday, my husband transferred his education benefits to me, and the Nest name was created that week because I hate algebra and I needed something to keep me going. But 2 years into school, the Red Bulls, we were losing them to suicide. We were losing them to homelessness, divorce, addiction. They were getting in trouble with the law from DUIs and domestic violence. Nobody could get a handle on it, but those people that said they were there to help weren't there. And my house and my yard was full. And so thus the Nest came a little bit earlier than we expected. And you're right, they come here. It's 124 acres, but I promised my stepfather that I would not take any money from the government that would come with strings attached to it, because then you have to follow the rules, or you have to stand next to them for their photo op to say, look what we did. And I won't do that.
You become a pawn at that point. You know what I mean?
Yes. And the entities that are willing to do that do less and less and rely on ours. We don't turn veterans away whether they can pay or not. We say we do it on a wing and a prayer, and we still do that. So even during this whole COVID thing, all of those people, including the VA, they were shut down for months. Oh, wait, they still are. But they had a class a couple Fridays ago that directed what they were supposed to say so that the veterans and their families would think that it was because of COVID and that they were actually still giving treatment and allowing them to come in. That is a lie.
Okay.
It is
so
a
unpack
lie.
that a little bit more so that people will understand. Because when the VA shut down, what services were they still providing? Were they providing emergency services? Were veterans able to go in and continue their mental health treatment plan?
No.
All that shut down.
Everything was shut down. And as a matter of fact, in Minnesota, so before the state technically shut down, so for those that don't understand what that system looks like, there's long waiting lists for everything from mental health. So a couple years ago, the St. Cloud VA stopped doing their PTSD track, which was a very good program, and they rolled it into their RRTP. The problem is they never get to the mental health component of it. So
just so people understand, so PTSD, and then what was the RRST part?
Our RRTP is their residential treatment program,
okay,
and it's the inpatient program there. So anyways, when COVID pandemic hit, there's these waiting lists for veterans to go into these programs. It all stopped. And so that Monday, veterans arrived to go into the program, and they were told, we can't take you.
Okay.
And they had no place to go. So that first part of that first week, the Nest got very busy very quickly because no other places were taking them. None. So I get the phone call from the VA going, oh, Melony, how are you guys doing? How are the veterans doing during the COVID? I said, what do you want? Because you never call in or nice. They have no place would take them. All those other places aren't taking anyone, but yet they're standing next to people taking pictures going, oh, we're all in this together, except for the veterans who they've now made homeless. They can't get mental health. They're isolating them. They just started taking people out of 100 and I believe it's 132 beds in the RRTP program. They're taking less than 25 people. And in order to go, you have to isolate for 2 weeks in your room. And then you can come out and do partial programming, and then you go back to your room.
So
Okay,
it's like so they turn into a jail, basically.
well, you've now isolated them.
Yeah.
What don't you do to a veteran?
Yeah, if you're struggling from PTSD and you want to get help, the last thing you'd want to do is just be completely isolated.
Absolutely. And then you add on top of that right now. So we took all those veterans in. We have been the one taking people in. We don't turn them away whether they can pay. We don't turn them away for any. We've just been taking them, including veterans that technically should be in a nursing home because nobody's taking anyone. Well, I can tell you the nest hasn't had any COVID.
Yep.
None.
See, and that's the thing is, and I think a lot of people are starting to pick up on this, but COVID is like the flu, and it affects a lot of people throughout the country, but the effects that it has on people who don't even have COVID are also extremely deadly and extremely detrimental to the progress of doing all the commitments that the government already had made. And then you think of the fact that these are veterans who were in Vietnam, Korea, all these different wars. They signed the dotted line, and now they're not getting help from the government when that was the one thing that they left with, that the government was going to help them.
That was the promise that our government made to them. And people will say, oh, a veteran just wants a handout. There may be a few that do that. There may be a few that lie to the system, but the large majority, just like law enforcement, 99% of them are not like that. We still have Vietnam vets that don't have benefits. And there are laws in place that says it's the presumption that anything wrong with them was the effect of Vietnam, yet they don't have it.
And that's because the government doesn't want to pay.
Yes.
So one of the things that we talked about in terms of grants and in terms of stuff like that, we had talked, I think this was a couple years back, but we had a discussion about grants and the fact that there was a bunch of red tape put onto a grant that the Nest was trying to get. And one of them was like what you're supposed to pay each person and how much their salaries are supposed to be, because I think it's important for people to understand nonprofits, generally speaking, if they're getting government grants, have to follow specific guidelines.
Right.
To include what the salary of the people running the nonprofit are to be paid. So Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's all this red tape stuff and I mean, like tons of stuff, but we're all volunteer. We don't get paid. And because the Nest, as that amazing general told me, it's a pilot program. It's kind of been and was created after the Civil War in California, actually, where veterans came back and they literally created their own community. And that's where the actual LAVA sits now. That is now deteriorated. There's nothing there. The veterans there aren't getting the care that imagine how many veterans in LA, if they allowed them to go onto the one side of the campus that they've let deteriorate, John. Now you've seen the Nest, you've seen what we've started with, empty buildings that the government walked away from 20 plus years, didn't shut it down properly, have all been renovated by volunteers and just stuff that people were throwing away. And it's not an institution. You don't get an institution feel. It's home. It's not brand new crystal chandeliers or nothing like that. It's home. That's what it is. Things and items that came out of people's homes. And imagine how many veterans in LA could have a place to heal and feel safe if they would just do that. And technically, the family won the Supreme Court ruling that they were supposed to allow them to take that property back. I know the family. And they keep tying it up in court and tying it up in court. But that's what I'm saying. They tie it all up. So the grant that you're talking about, I was asked to testify at our Capitol. And you know me, I don't change who I am. I may have dressed up a little, but my mouth doesn't change. And I remember going to the first meeting that I went to. I had heard about this military action group, and I went there. You know what? I know some of the people that go there. I work well with some of them. And the first thing that someone told me was, you'll never get funds unless you go through us, which is another nonprofit, because we're the only ones. I said, F off. I don't need your funds. The other part that I don't like is when you go, they want a script of what you're going to discuss. Otherwise, you don't get to go talk because it might not fit a narrative. So I gave them a copy of words. I just stood up and shredded them. And I told them, that's your world, not mine. Mine is to just love them until they can love themselves and get help that they need. So we went through that. Oh, what an amazing thing. Yeah, until, oh, we can help you. No strings attached. I have made that loud and clear. That was the promise. The nest is yours, John. You know that. It is every veteran that served, regardless if they served in combat, they didn't serve in combat, whatever that is. Anyone that signed on that dotted line deserves. They deserve. And they're honorable, and they're not broken like they say they are. So essentially it was a long battle. And then we didn't get it. I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing layers of paperwork. You're not coming to our nest and looking at our things and determining. No, the veterans made that choice. They said no. So I walked away from it. And then it went back. We had been asked to come back and speak, and before the veteran committee, we did that. You know, they'll tell you, oh, what an honorable, wonderful thing you're doing. Da, da, da. So they did, and it was in and passed for a straight cash appropriation, meaning nothing. We were supposed to get $500,000.
Okay.
That was 3 years ago.
And it's still tied up?
Oh yeah, because that's not the way they do things, you see. So, oh no, we can't just give you that. Well, wait a minute. Y'all have a campaign dinner that costs more than that.
Yep.
You're trying to hold others more accountable than you're holding your own self. Let's see, how many times have we paid for the turbine wind thing at the St. Cloud VA? Over and over and over. Let's see, how much money left Minnesota on an airplane for daycares? And you're holding us to a standard? You can come here. Our numbers just increased. We're now at 100 veterans that live here. But it's their home. They take care of it. They get mental health, accelerated resolution therapy.
Mm-hmm.
We know what that's like. That's an amazing therapy. Guess who won't do it? The St. Cloud VA and the VA system, because it doesn't fit their narrative. Why wouldn't you want to use an amazing therapy that's been proven to work in 5 to 7 sessions instead of medication?
Well, and I think that's kind of one of the issues, right? Is like there's obviously more at the top level that we're dealing with. And I think it has to do with contracts and agreements and backdoor handshakes.
You are totally right with that. Mm-hmm. Totally right with that. So you add in this whole crisis thing right now that veterans are going through, and you talk about that. You talked about it earlier, the whole COVID thing and what that does to people mentally. Even someone that has never had issues. Mm-hmm. What this long-term part of things, or elderly parents that are in nursing homes. So I'll just unpack this other little thing for you, and maybe you can go out and figure out these answers. So we have the Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs, who runs our veterans homes for our elderly. You know where they were getting supplies when this started?
Where?
Off the swap-in cells, because they had none. They had no masks. They didn't have chucks. They didn't have sanitizer. Guess who went and made sure that they got them? The nest did. Our veterans here said, you give to those that served before us, we'll be okay here. And I trusted them. And we literally, along with American Legions, we were sending them and getting them. We had people making masks all over. Then I contacted My Pillow, and he started dropping them off at the VA and the veterans homes. Why? The amount of money they're given, and they're not even the veterans homes, the staff there are amazing. That has to get approved up at the governor's
Little level, yeah.
Yeah, so why wouldn't you make sure, as a former command sergeant major, why wouldn't you make sure that those that served before you had what they needed?
Yeah, and those are kind of some of the things that I'd love to ask those questions, you know what I mean, and try to figure out. I'm curious too, right now, so we're what, 3 months into this now, or something like that? What has the VA opened up now, you know, in St. Cloud or Minneapolis VA? I mean, what have they opened up for veterans to come in and get help for?
So you can go into urgent care, but you have to do the whole get your temperature taken, The acute unit is open, but they try and get them off there right away. And then in St. Cloud VA, I actually heard from a hospital in Brainerd that the St. Cloud VA, when they called over there to get a veteran there, that they had at their hospital, which is the protocol. If they're a veteran, they should be able to go back over to their VA system. They said they were in a hospital. They couldn't take them. Well, what the hell are they then? If you can't take a veteran in crisis, then what good are you? Or you hear from the local providers who can't say anything because if they do, then the VA won't pay them. That we've tried to get them in there, but they won't take them. And so
can they go? Can they go? So, because I thought there was something that was signed where if the VA couldn't get you in, that you could then go to a local provider and the VA would cover it.
Right.
Is that effective in this scenario?
Well, it technically should be effective, but you talked earlier about the upper and mid management. Kind of like our country as a whole, things change. Right now, our country is in a whole shit show of unbalance and unruliness and hate and all those things. And I can tell you what happened in Minneapolis, and you were there on the front lines. I was messaging you. Our veterans were out there bringing food and water to law enforcement, to the Red Bulls that were out there. They were going in and bringing people out that were afraid to get them the hell out of the area. But even that, for a veteran to watch that, their instinct is to go protect.
Yep.
Their instinct is, but then it also, because our elected officials can't agree or get their shit together.
And that's the real problem.
They're really feeling like places that they've deployed to help bring democracy and peace and give people those rights, that's now here.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I started doing this. And I mean, obviously, one of the biggest interactions that I generally have is with law enforcement and having conversations. And I show good law enforcement, and I show the guys that are assholes. And there's a lot of good cops. I mean, that's the thing. There's also some shitty ones, and you got to find them and you got to expose those.
Well, and that's just like the VA. There's a lot of amazing people that work there.
Yep.
But unfortunately, there's a lot of shit people that have been there for decades, just like our elected officials. So essentially, the veteran choice that you're talking about was one of the things that Pete Hegseth worked for years, trying to change that, trying to give the veterans a choice of where to go and if they can't get services. But literally, I got this from people that work at the VA. They were told, we just have to wait it out. He'll be out of office soon. So how bad is that you're using politics instead of taking care of those that you claim that you care about?
Well, and this is the problem with the government in its entirety. It got so big, so quick, and now everyone is
they're there for
decades.
Money.
Yeah, they're there forever to make money.
It wasn't created for them. Our government was created for you to go do the work of the country and leave and go back and hold a job.
To serve your people.
Yes, and not to line your pockets with backdoor deals. So how ironic that the thing that shut the special session down was eminent domain. Well, if anyone would like to research that, they've been trying to buy that property for a while now.
Which property is this?
The property that just got burned up during the riots.
Oh, okay.
So people always say, follow the money, follow the money. Unfortunately, that's what it's become in politics.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if
At
you
the
follow
cost
the
of,
money in politics, you see who's getting what, because all these top and mid-level officials, they're making money. And that's one of the things I wanted to cut into with the grant. I think we had talked about this a while back, but they had wanted you to get paid a certain amount, even though you said I'm a volunteer.
yeah, they're like, we've never done that before. We wouldn't even know how to do that. And I'm like, what do you mean? And they said, no, all these other people. So you have organizations, and they're making high 5 and 6 figures to do what they claim to love. Well, of course they love it. They're getting 6 figures, for crying out loud.
Yeah, and it's not small. I mean,
No.
they're talking about large sums of
Yeah.
money for an individual. And what's disturbing to me is they told you that you have to take it in order to be able to get the grant.
Yeah.
And when you said, no, I'd rather put that towards the veterans, that's unacceptable, even though the grant is supposed to help the veterans.
Right. Well, and then they wanted statistics. I don't believe in statistics. I said if it saved one life, then it was worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And it saved hundreds.
Yep.
And I'm not backing down. I mean, I was invited. I got hate mail. I got hate
Messages on
emails,
Facebook and
yeah, messages on Facebook, because I was invited to go to Washington, D.C. and have breakfast at the White House to talk about veterans issues, the VA, suicide, because any one of those entities that have been there will tell them whatever they need to hear, and where they stand next to them and say, oh, yes. So do you remember when they said the number went from 22 down to 21 and they were praising themselves?
Mm-hmm.
What the hell are you praising yourself for? That's still 21 families without their loved one. And that's truly not the statistic, because they don't count the overdoses from the medication, because those were accidental. They don't count the unexplainable car accidents. I mean, you name it. It's like if someone that dies right now, they died of COVID.
Yep. That's why I don't trust
Because it's about
statistics
money.
either. Yeah, well, they need to justify, oh, it's working, but it's
Yes.
not enough to where the VA doesn't need as much money. Everything is kind of lined up to make it so the right people get the money that they're supposed to get, and nobody else can get it.
Well, and if you think back to the fall, I always laugh because when I went to LA about 4 years ago, to go meet with Doc Sharon in LA County, and I may or may not have been threatened to be arrested at the VA system.
Weird. I could never imagine.
I know. Can you imagine? I always say I'll sport an orange jumpsuit. I ain't got no problem with that. I told him I'd be back, so we're getting ready to have some bikes roll in there. But
I would like to go with you.
Oh, absolutely.
The shit out of it.
Well, you guys, there's something about veterans, they're always protecting. And I don't fear. You've helped me out when I've gotten a hate message, and I don't fear. I just don't have that in me. And if I do, they're not going to know it. But I was.
And for most people, because most people don't know this, so Melony's gotten death threats, and supposedly people are going to come to her house or do this or do that, and so it's always people who they just don't like the fact that she speaks out, and suck it. It's freedom of speech is what it is, and that's the constitutional right. And veterans fought for the Constitution, right? And we continue to believe in that. We took an oath, and yes, there are some oath breakers, and everyone who's in office that decides that they don't want to help, keep the Constitution intact, they don't want to help veterans who secure the Constitution and do it daily. Those are oath breakers. And for every veteran, you ask them, did you mean your oath when you took it? Will you lay down your life if it comes to that to protect the Constitution? And the fact is, yes. Any day, any place, name it. We all are about that. So when people want to tell Melony to shut up, come make her, because you got to get through all of us first. You know what I mean? And that's how it works.
Well, when I went out to LA County, because we're going to stir the pot out there a little bit, because there's a lot of homeless veterans out there. I was 8 years old when I walked those beaches, and I am 53 on the 7th of this month. and veterans still are underneath the Santa Monica Pier. They still gather there to pray, to share what little they have. And so I had to tell Doc Sharon he's probably going to have to pay more for my hotel stay, because I might have took things out of the room. And then I was going, because you can actually be arrested for feeding homeless in LA.
The government's supposed to take care of them and they don't. So
Yes.
you can get arrested for doing what they should be doing.
Yes. So you can be arrested. So I would get up and I would go to this little coffee shop that was a block. I was right on the pier. And they're like, you go in, you need to go into the hotel, true veteran form. And you don't be going out. It's not like when you were little. And I'm like, uh-huh. And their catch is always, you promise, right? Because I always keep mine. And I'm like, but I didn't say it. And then they're telling me I can't go to Skid Row because it's far too dangerous. It wasn't like it was back when I was 8 years old. And so I may or may not have been in a very dark neighborhood trying to do outreach. And my phone rang. The phone ringing startled me because I was out a little late. It was dark. And I answer it because I don't know the number. And they're like, don't you think you need to get back to the hotel? You were told not to. And I'm like, who is this? Of course, it was a combat vet. So they had been making sure that I was safe, because I just want to go find the veterans and offer them a place to call home. But I was feeding them. But that's what we're talking about.
Did you get in trouble for feeding them?
No. Matter of fact, the little coffee shop, I had to get there early because the coffee shop, they only had certain hours. And let's just say I was born and raised in Minnesota. So I don't eat all that other, some of that, like all that natural stuff, which no, everyone eats to their own, but whatever. But I was going in and I had to get there early because they would run out, right?
Okay.
Because they only had set hours. So I got there early and I would buy everything and get coffee to go. And they must have told the owner, because when I went there the next day, I got to the counter and the girl looked a little bit nervous, and I thought, well, God, did I do something wrong? And the owner came out and he said, can I ask you what you're doing? My staff said that you're here and that you're buying up all of these muffins and bars. And I said, I'm doing outreach for the veterans. And that doesn't mean that the veterans weren't taking care of other homeless, because they definitely take care of the women and children that are homeless, to make sure that they're not harmed. So we share. That's what veterans do. They share. And I said, and he says, that they'll arrest you if they find you doing that. And I said, well, let them know that I'm going to have church service underneath the pier with the veterans. And if they'd like to come down there, I'll be more than happy to have the news media down here. And we can have a discussion about your homeless. Mm-hmm. And he goes, you don't have to pay for anything else. You're a rare thing. So that's what I did. And that's really sad that all these years later, when there's a perfectly good campus, just like Sauk Center was, that they could live and create their own place to heal with honor. But I don't. You can't take government funds. The vet centers, that's another example that was a great thing when it started. And I had the distinct pleasure, it was just a weird connection. And General Shelato had told me the story about how the vet center started out in California. A psychiatrist from Vietnam, he truly cared and he wanted to help. And he told another brother that he served with, I don't care what time, if you need me, I will be here. And a brother in arms wanted to go in, and the VA told him he could not go in and see this doctor. So he was in crisis. Well, he thought that the doctor had lied to him, and he had bared his soul to him. And so he might have tunneled through the VA system and got in his doctor's office. And so there was a standoff, but that doctor reversed it and said, no, this isn't it. And he walked away from the VA and started the vet centers. And he walked his brother in arms through the court systems and said all they would have to do was pick up the phone. He would have been more than happy to speak with him. And so that's how the vet centers did. Well, then the VA said, oh, we should work together. Do you know what that man's doing today? Some of his clients have arrived in Minnesota.
Oh, really?
And that he treated But out of the clear blue, Doc Sharon said, hey, I need to connect you with this guy. And he started talking. And I said, can I stop you for just a minute? And he said, yeah. I said, would you happen to be? And he goes, oh my God. And I said, no, I just want to say thank you. Do you know how many Vietnam veterans have spoke of the amazing work? But you know what he went back to doing? Exactly what I do. Go back out on the streets and just take care of veterans.
So, and with the veteran centers, the VA now has their hands in it. So I'm guessing that that's gotten completely
Yeah.
flipped around.
So it still falls under that umbrella. They still get funding. They still do those. And you know, we have the mobile unit that's supposed to go all over. Well, why would you need it in Brooklyn Center when you have Minneapolis VA, when you have CBOX? That's supposed to go out into rural areas and provide services.
And they don't.
Not very often.
Yeah. So for the listeners and viewers, how can they help out Eagles Healing Nest? How can they donate or get a hold of you guys or let other veterans know where the nest is and how to get in touch with you?
They can, you know what? I don't ask for donations.
Well, yes, but there's people all over the country and the world that watch this and they want to help.
What I want to tell them now, especially today, especially during this COVID and the unrest, is check on your veterans because they're dying of suicide and they're relapsing. Or if you know that they're struggling, bring them to Sauk Center. Just call, text.
And I'll put the phone number as well in the comment section, and then on both the podcast as well as the video on YouTube.
You can find us online if you need to message us, any of those things. We're 124 acres. We got 4 buildings left to renovate. Come work side by side with us. Come heal, come decompress. We just added 10 camping sites.
Awesome.
For veterans that maybe they've processed all of their stuff already, but they just want to come hang out with veterans. And it's 124 acres, and we have our horses, and we have our cows, and our chickens, and our ducks, and our deer, and our wild turkeys. We have an art studio, a rock and gem studio, a welding shop, a wood shop, but it's mostly peer-to-peer, and we bring clinicians in, but it's just loving. It's doing what's right. It's just keeping those promises. And for the record, the nest was promises made, promises kept. In 2012, before any election, before any of that, we did that. You all kept your promise to serve, and families serve as well. And that's a promise that you all made to each other. You serve together, you go to war together, you train together, you know how to heal together. Each and every one of you do. And I don't even care how mad y'all get at each other. I know the state came here one time. I got to tell the story. It's so funny. I know. You're not really politically correct, right? You're kind of like the Fox Nation thing now, where 4-letter words kind of fly around every once in a while when they're mad.
Fuck it.
Yeah. So I got a call that they had a complaint. Okay, fine. You know, I deal with people that have mental health and all those issues. That's not uncommon sometimes. It wasn't important enough for them to come immediately because they were going on vacation. When they called, I had no idea who the person was because whatever. So they finally come back from vacation. So there was 2 things that they said, 2 things that they had to complain on. That they weren't fed at the nest. Now, John, you've ate here.
Yep.
There's not a shortage of food. The average weight gain is 30 to 40 pounds. And that we curse and we swear. So when they came, this state official came and a county official, and keep in mind, the county only has to go by what the state says. She came in and she's like, I need X, Y, and Z. And I said, no, you don't have a right to see anything that these veterans share with. I very rarely keep notes on it.
It's not government funded. It's private.
She's like, well, I need to address these. And I said, well, here's my menus. Here's to show that because as we grew, sometimes we do have to purchase some groceries now. I gave her those, and she's like, and you swear. And this is exactly what I did. Honest to God, I leaned back and I said, shut the fuck up. She almost had a heart attack. And I said, look, you don't understand our world and our culture. I'm kind of a small person. Some veterans are pretty big. Some veterans can be intimidating. I was raised by Vietnam vets and bikers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care how they get out or how they express themselves when they're in pain or they're joking, any of that. I really don't care as long as they get it out.
Yep.
When they get off their ass and are willing to go out like you, like me, like Mama Jill, like hundreds of other veterans do, and sit down and not be afraid to walk that line and literally take the gun out of someone's mouth and bring them to safety, then they can tell me how the hell to do it.
Yep, I would agree. And the problem is that the government's not going to do that.
No.
Not without us forcing them.
Yes. And that'll take me back to my invitation to Washington, D.C. Why wouldn't I go?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't I go? An offer was extended. I've prayed with Vice President Pence. I have met with the president on 2 occasions, and I was given an invitation to come to speak about what they're talking about changing in the VA. How do you change the suicide thing? Okay, the one thing I learned in statistics class, you can make them read however you want to get the result you need.
Yep.
I'm not willing to do that because that was just about my son. And to me, in our military world, you're my son. Maybe not by birth, but in my Vietnam vets, they're my dads. We have our own family. I got hate mail. I got, you're this, you're that. You know what? At least they took the time to listen. Did I change who I was? Hell no. I didn't change.
Nope.
And I know that some of the changes and that what we spoke about are things that they're trying to implement today. Will it happen? Maybe not in my lifetime.
Well, and there's always going to be a resistance from the people who are getting their pockets lined. They're going to fight back.
Absolutely.
You know, they don't want to lose control.
No. But I'm not going to be, I am an American. Just my family fought for generations. I have a right to my free speech. I have a right to do all those things as well. And I don't hate on anyone else. The world is too short for that.
Yep. Well, it's been great chatting with you, Melony. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
You
You're gonna
are
come
actually,
soon.
I'm going to come up there, and I want to do so I'm going to go to the VA now and ask some questions and see if I can't rustle some feathers.
Oh yeah, ask them where their patients are.
I'm going to. That's actually going to be one of my first questions.
It is. I can tell you where they are.
They're there.
They moved the patients from Minneapolis to St. Cloud.
Why?
Well, the answer to that was because the answer that I got was because of the COVID pandemic, that the VA is to serve the community. But don't you think their first response should be to take care of the fucking veterans that they committed to taking care of?
Well, yeah, they're not even doing that.
There you go.
I mean,
That is what they did. They
government
moved.
healthcare is a terrible idea because this is a perfect example of what the fuck happens.
So they moved the veterans from the Minneapolis VA to the St. Cloud VA, and both sat empty. And that's where we are today. They're slowly opening it up. They've now trained them on what to say so that if a family member or veteran calls, it won't seem that they're not taking care of them, because that would be a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And telemedicine, imagine how telemedicine's working for our elderly veterans.
Yeah.
Or for rural America. Anyways, have fun with that. Give them hell. They will threaten to arrest you.
Good.
They'll ask you to leave.
I've got 4 days off, so
Perfect.
I don't care.
Absolutely. I know you're up for the challenge.
It'll be fun. Plus, I have this beautiful DHS form that talks about filming on government property. So we'll have a nice conversation about those things. And I'm going with another person, Minnesota News Now as well. So we're going to go out there.
Yeah.
And then I want to come up there at some point next month, and then we're gonna try and do we were talking before the show. We're gonna try and do a show at least every 2 weeks or 3 weeks to just give an update on kind of where things are at and different things that develop too. So
Yeah, and I think that because really the only thing y'all have me do now is the paperwork.
mm-hmm.
Because truly the goal was for the veterans to create the nest, their nest. And that's they do. And so I think for you to come and see what they've created and what they're doing and their ideas, like one of the veterans came up just before you come on, and he's like, I've been trying to get him here for 2 weeks, but now it's an emergency. Literally, I picked up the phone and the veterans gave me shit. I said, look, we'll be there tomorrow morning at 8. And he's like, yes, ma'am. It's time to be honest about what we need and take care of each other.
Yep, 100%. Well, I love you. God
I
bless
love you too. You be safe.
Will do. Tell everybody I said hi, and I'll be up there this in the next couple of weeks here.
Perfect.
All right, we'll see you soon.
All right.